Welcome to another episode of Selling What's Possible. I'm Dave Irwin, your host, and Selling What's Possible is all about enterprise account growth and retention. And joining me today is Paul Butterfield. He is CEO of Revenue Flywheel Group. Welcome, Paul. It's great to have you join us today. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for inviting me. I've been looking forward to this.
Well, Paul, I'd like to start off with you sharing your background a little bit about the customer journey enablement, which is a phrase that you use, which I think is terrific, working backwards from customers. Just give us a sort of high level as to where that comes from and your perspective on it and point of view.
Sure. So I think a brief background that'll help give context. I grew up in sales. I still think of myself as a seller first and everything else somewhere after that. And, in tech sales for most of that career, pretty good mix of channel and direct sales organizations. As you said, some good size was into it, Microsoft, HP. And I was at a company where I was leading one of the the Eastern AE team at a SaaS company back in it was in 2012 when this happened. We had a new EVP of sales come in. And I went in for my one-on-one on a Friday morning. It was in Q3 September. So I'm thinking all deals to go, all the normal things. And instead, what he did is he wrote the words sales enablement on his whiteboard. He started telling me about how he'd observed the way I was developing my teams and the fact that we had nothing going on in the company to develop any employee. If your manager developed you, great. If they didn't, too bad. And I don't operate that way. Number one, I believe as leaders, we have an obligation to invest in our people, and they're looking to us to do that, and we need to do that. Number two, I had a quota to hit, and if HR wasn't going to train people, I had to figure out something, right? So long story short, he said, look, I've watched what you do with your team, and I would like you to go home this weekend and think about if you'd be willing to take on this new role and create what you do at scale for my entire organization. Well, I went home for the weekend, thought about it, and here we are. So I mention that because my concept of customer journey enablement, I didn't always call it that, but I was doing it. And the reason that I was doing it was honestly all the years as a seller that I saw problems. How many, no offense, but crappy trainings did I sit through or watch my team sit through? Many, too many. Right. I knew from experience that the way that I was trying to have my sellers do discovery and run pipeline and sales opportunities was okay, except that marketing's messaging didn't align with it. I knew from experience that we had too many deals that didn't turn up because information was not shared with the implementation or even worse, the customer success team. So those are just some examples. So as I was building this enablement, this was fall of 2012, there were no rules for enablement yet. There was very little out there. And that's a good thing in a way, because it just made sense to me. If we're going to enable the sales teams, then this is an opportunity to get everybody that's customer facing aligned for a better and more consistent experience. So short story, that's where it came from. I don't think I thought up the term customer journey enablement for several years after that, but that was the genesis of why.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, one of the things that really sticks out, Paul, is the holistic sort of approach that you advocate, which is in the context of enterprise accounts, right? There's a whole team involved. There's an account seller, but they're only about 10% of the team. You have all sorts of subject matter experts and client service support people and executive management and operations folks. And a lot of times the experience of the client is the result of the collective interfacing with that whole group of people. And so one of the challenges I think that account teams face, that CSOs talk about, is collaboration or the lack thereof. Because, departments are so siloed. So tell us a little bit about sort of, the holistic approach you advocate in the context of how the customer's looking at that, relationship and at the value of a supplier or vendor.
There's a lot to unpack there. so let's start, for example, with, I'll just do a few examples. Let's start with the typical product marketing that's out there. And I have a lot of good friends in product marketing. This is not meant to be a slam on them, but this is my observation working with and inside of many companies over the years, that typically we don't take companies, when I say we don't take a true customer-centric approach to how we talk about our product. If you go to most websites, what are they talking about? Feature, feature, feature. There may even be a little pop out with comparing the features that they have with their top two competitors. What you don't see is targeted messaging that talks about, here are the personas or the executive types that are solving problems with our solution, whatever it is. Here's the problems they're solving. Here's how they're solving. You don't see that. So we're talking far too much about the product. One of the things that when we're doing this customer journey enablement is think about it. Okay, what does a customer care about? Customer cares about solving problems. Customer cares about what they're going to be able to do or not do with whatever it is you're offering to them. So one of the ways I think about it is how do we work with the marketing department to then teach the sales team how to talk about our offerings as a verb instead of a noun.
Gotcha.
That's something not a lot of companies are great at. All right. So that's one piece of it. You had mentioned in the sales cycle, and I don't know how deep you want to go into this, but if you're, especially when we talk about enterprise, if somebody tells me, oh yeah, I had a great discovery meeting and they're going to make the decision and I don't need to talk to anybody else. It's like, you know what, dude, I would just lost that right now because I guarantee that's not the case, right? You need to dig a little more there. And so when you are going in, a lot of mistake or things I see happen is we do one or two discoveries. So in an enterprise, I don't know what your current research shows, but most people I talk to in an enterprise opportunity, you're looking probably 7 to 9 decision makers easily at various stages. Now they don't have the same level of influence, but they're involved in the process. And so if you go in and you think about a typical sales cycle, you go in, you have a discovery meeting, maybe 2 discovery meetings, and then you at some point just jump into a demo. Well, how do you know what those other 5 or 6 people even care about? How do you know what they're trying to solve? The odds are that the COO, the CFO, and the CMO aren't trying to solve the same problems, even though you may be offering something that each of them can use. So that's another example is let's be thoughtful about involving everybody in the discovery. I don't want to needlessly drag down sales cycles. But in my experience, if you don't identify and do your account mapping early and take the time to get discovery with those folks, then you're missing out. Something's going to bite you down the road more often than not that you just didn't take time to find out. So that's another example. And again, with the time we have, I don't know how deep you want to go, but those are the kinds of concepts that I have found make a huge difference. And customers notice, right? They can tell when you're taking time to understand what they're trying to accomplish and help them quantify whether or not there's an opportunity there. Sometimes bad news early is good news for you as a seller, but also frankly for your prospects.
Yeah, no, I really like that. One of the things we advocate is building out these stakeholder maps and really understanding who the decision makers are.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to go sort of a layer deeper than what a lot of account teams aren't really even taught or trained how to do. But you really need to understand the who, but then, what is it that each one's interested in? And so tell us a little bit about, obviously there's desired outcomes. There's sort of perspectives and points of view that you can accumulate and look into just from basic research on these key people. But you mentioned discovery and sort of understanding what's important to them. What do you recommend is the types of things to dig into around each of those key stakeholders? Because I agree with you. If you do that carefully up front, you're going to actually speed up the sales cycle versus push into no decision for eternity, right? Which is a killer for all.
Or just as likely, you'll lose to a competitor that was smarter about how they
go about it.
And we talked a little bit earlier about the importance of data mining. Unless you're a brand new company, you have data on who's buying your product, why they're buying it, what they're doing with it, and how do you and the smart thing is package that into bite-sized knowledge that a salesperson can actually assimilate and use to drive business conversations as opposed to product and feature-based conversations, which is where most sellers go by default, because to be fair to them, it's how they were trained. Think about your typical sales kickoff session. What's it about, right? Oh, here's our new release next year, So that's what they default to. So it starts very basically with that. Do our sellers have the ability to show up? And whether our buyers are at the C level or the VP level or mid level, doesn't matter. Have we equipped them with the knowledge to go in and talk to those people about what they care about and what's on their mind? one of my favorite books, and I can tell you the one if you want me to, which one it is, but it was one of my favorite sales books. That I don't think it's a methodology, but I love some of the approaches that they teach. And one of them is that if at some point in a discovery meeting, your prospect doesn't look back and say, I have no idea because I never thought about that, you did not have a great discovery meeting. You probably checked most of the same boxes your competition did, but you didn't do anything to expand how they're thinking and how they're looking at things. And you can't do that as a seller if you don't understand their world and what they care about and how others like them or similar to them are using your services. So
Yep.
that's, to me, it's very basic, but and it sounds like 101 stuff, but I go in to help companies and it's just not there. Not often.
Interesting. Yeah. So, we often talk about the customer IQ
Mhm.
of the team, and I look at the account executive leader of the team as
Mhm.
really being responsible for bringing back that intelligence about what the customer's world looks like and the needs
Mhm.
are back to
Mhm.
the rest of the team. Almost flipping the script, right?
Yep.
Account team meetings are often about our objectives to sell something by a certain deadline, but they
Mhm.
should be the other way, which is our objective is to help the client accomplish this particular goal and objective collectively as a team. Let me tell you
Right.
what it is and help you drive down that path. What are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely agree with that approach. And in my observation has been that many companies truly believe that they are customer centric. They're trying. But here's a litmus test I found useful. And I referenced this earlier. Ask them, what is the first step? When you have a meeting with a client, and if you have SDRs, it wouldn't be that meeting. What's the first meeting with an AE? That what's the objective? Many times they're going to tell you to do a demo. And to me, that's a litmus test right there. If you think that the best use of that prospect's time is to demo them the very first time you've met them and not have the conversation to discover what it is they're even trying to accomplish, then you're not thinking customer centric. So, back to your point, if I'm going in and I want to understand not only what are they trying to accomplish, but just as importantly, what is the potential impact? What what difficulty, expense, market share, whatever, are they not going to lose if they can change their situation, right? Everybody's got a future state they're trying to get to. Or what are the gains they're trying to get? Because it can go both ways, right? People will buy your product to avoid bad things as well as achieve good things, hopefully a combination of both. And understanding that up front, because if you can't help them quantify it in today's environment, nobody has money to burn. Every purchase is scrutinized under a microscope. And without a solid business case, you can't, you're not going to survive that process. So, getting to where I see teams working much better coordinate, there are two key things. I just want to kind of lay that basis for it. Number one, how are you defining your stages in your CRM? Doesn't matter what CRM you're using, but if I look at a stage two or stage three opportunity as a sales leader, is yours going to look the same as Walter's? Is going to look the same as Margaret's? In many organizations, it's not because the salespeople themselves are given too much latitude in what stage something's in. So going back to your comment earlier about the customer's buying journey, the customer's buying cycle. This is why good discovery is so critical. What we want to do is align those stages in our CRM to predictable customer inputs that we know we're going to get in the sales process. So I'll give you an example. We sit down and we have a discovery meeting. In many organizations, this is a real point of contention. What's a qualified lead, right? What takes it gets converted from an SDR's funnel to an AE's funnel, just as an example. Lots of rock fights break out over that one. But if we come up with a consistent thing, right? What is the criteria that we know that if an AE understands something coming out of the meeting, then it's something that they should convert? Let's figure that out based on our data. We know our customers. Let's make that the standard that everybody follows so that as a sales leader, I rightfully know or reasonably expect that anything that comes into your pipeline since I talked to you last week has met a criteria of questions. And there's some that I suggest that have worked very well. But that's one way teams get together, because otherwise they're all over the place and funnels become garbage quickly because there's just not reality. It's not. But what I'm suggesting is we're tying it to specific customer inputs. So much more reliable. to do it that way. I'll pause in case you want to go a little bit deeper on that, but that's the first step that I recommend people look at is fix your sales stages, make those aligned to your customer.
Yeah, no, I really like that. In our world, there's right, for our clients, there's many, many, many cross-sell, upsell opportunities. And those opportunities, because you're already in the customer, you have a relationship, a perceived relationship by those customers. And there's often many divisions and many different areas to be servicing those customers. So you can have multiple types of relationships, but based on those relationships, the quality of what comes into that pipeline, it's really interesting, Paul, because I've noticed the teams that do this really well, even what they call the opportunity in the CRM is different than anything you'll see on the prospecting side. It's usually in the context of the customer's own vernacular, their own initiative names. They reflect something that they're funding, that they've already created a initiative around. And I think that that's a very good sign when you begin to see that. So you want to see account teams surfacing things in the words of the customer about what the customer's working on. And I think when it comes to pipeline development, you're absolutely right. If you can get the customer to validate they're trying to solve this problem, they're they're putting together a project around solving the problem, they have a timeline around it, it's being funded, there's evidence, if you will, related to them actually going down this path, and you're trying to hop on that train and be part of the trusted team that's going to be implementing that. So in the context of that, talk a little bit about how teams can earn the right and develop that trust. How do they develop that trust to be at the table, to be requested to come in, invited in to participate in even looking at an initiative that's originating from the customer versus from the vendor side?
Now, are we assuming that the customer has a current initiative in place? Because a lot of the opportunity is to get in early before the customer has an initiative or has even identified it for themselves. I want to make sure I'm addressing the right stage.
Well, you know what? That's a great point. I think you could say, there's initiatives that have yet to be created that could be co-created, and there's ones that they have started or you can tell they're going to be starting.
Okay.
Maybe we can differentiate between the two and talk about those two separate things.
They're not terribly different, but let me take a crack at it. I'm going to start with where there's not an initiative, because in some ways that's easier. I mean, the research is getting a little bit old, but I'd be surprised if it has changed. It wasn't SBI. I can't remember. It was one of the think tanks. I read it years ago, but they did a large study showing that if you came in and you were the first one to get them thinking about an initiative versus you came in and you were selling into an existing initiative, what they found over thousands of opportunities they evaluated probably wouldn't surprise you. But when you're the first in the door, your close rate goes up, is almost double. But your sales cycle also tends to be a fair amount longer. Now, if you think about it, you're educating, you're doing things that add a lot of value, but they do take some time. So keep that in mind. But to have a 2x close rate because you're the first one in there talking about it. And that goes back to what I was talking about a little while ago, which is, do I understand, whether you call it an ICP, ideal customer profile, whether you call it a buying persona, different companies have different names for it. Do I understand what they are typically concerned about? And am I working with my marketing department and my sales leadership to create messaging that is customer centric? So for example, if I were reaching out to you and talking to you or doing outreach to you, whether it's phone, whether it's email, I'm using that knowledge that I have to suggest some things. Dave, I have the opportunity to work with a lot of CEOs. And right now, with what's going on in your industry, the top 2 or 3 things I hear over and over are, and then I'm just going to spell them out very quickly. That's just one way that I would use that kind of knowledge. Doesn't mean that everybody's going to respond, but it is going to be more interesting to them than the typical outreach that I see even today, which is, hey, we just closed our Series C funding. Hey, we are the fill in the blank, which has no value to me and frankly, no credibility because I don't know you. right? But if you're telling me, look, I am working with peers of yours and solving these, helping them solve these problems consistently, are you dealing with any of those? It's a very different approach to come in, and it's going to maybe get you thinking. Maybe you weren't thinking of any of those three. Maybe you were, but I'm expanding your thinking with, again, we don't have time to get into a lot of detail, but that's the approach that we teach. And that's not something a seller should be winging. That is stuff that they should have practice that messaging and really understand it and go in and be able to have a conversational experience as opposed to a 20 questions experience for the prospect. Now, let's go to your next scenario. You come in and there's not there is already an initiative. Well, you can count on one thing. You're probably not the first one there. And if you're not the first one there, probably there's an incumbent or someone who's helped influence what they're telling you right now they need as part of this opportunity. So how do you break that cycle? Because too often we just get sucked into it and we're column B or worse, and we never even knew it. The way that we teach sellers to do that is be curious. I don't know if you remember Edward Deming's work. He's been gone for a while, but his whole theory of the 5 whys, right? If you ask why 5 times, you can get to the root of almost any, became a cornerstone of a Japanese business philosophy. And so use that and understand if somebody says, I need X feature or we need to be able to X, ask them why. I mean, very politely, but say, help me understand what's going on today that has that on your list. Okay, well, this is going on. Okay, great. When that happens, because I'm assuming something negative is happening or something you want to happen is not happening, we wouldn't be having this conversation, right? So help me understand, right? When you don't have that capability now, what impact is that having on what you just described to me? And you're going down that funnel with them, being curious and trying to really understand. And again, that may sound like kind of a, yeah, of course, but it doesn't happen. I've had especially now with conversational intelligence software, I have listened over the years to many, many sales conversations, and that is not the way they go. Salespeople tend to get excited, and I think that's fair. I grew up in sales. We have happy ears. If we weren't optimists, I don't think we could come in every day and keep cold calling, right? But the flip side of that optimism is when somebody says, I want something that you know is a feature you have, you just, yeah, we do that. Slow down, understand why. So that's why I'm using, when I said a similar approach, the business acumen, the practice, the role playing, the training that I have done as a seller is going to enable me to pivot, whether it's I need to generate them thinking about an opportunity, or getting them thinking about a gap in their business and a problem that they should be thinking about, or if they're already talking to a competitor, how do I get them to reset so I can understand the why behind what they say they need, not just take it at face value.
Right. Well, if we focus on the sort of co-creating, side of things, right? You're coming in, you've noticed a problem, a challenge, a threat, an issue. You're the first one there. You're recommending that, hey, I've taken a look at this. I wanted to ask you about the situation. We work with other people that are peers about this kind of situation. It's this role of really understanding the problem. And I think that's what you're advocating here is it goes beyond just surface level understanding. You're building credibility and understanding of the problem and relevancy of approach to address it, all at the same time by just asking those questions and trying to get underneath the surface, right? So
right. And I would add to that measurable impact, because it's just going to be tough to close any opportunity, especially at the enterprise level, if you can't show impact to at least the majority of the stakeholders in the buying process, if you can't help them figure out some way that their life is going to be better after they,
So, I look at impacts. So it's interesting. So there's ROI calculations that people make and examples of those sort of outputs. Talk a little bit about how you best present those types of impacts or outcomes with credibility, so it's not perceived as high level information that people ignore. I think oftentimes, right, the value of the impacts are really significant in there, but I think that how do you get customers to really pay attention and take those types of impacts to heart and use that internally? Are there certain types of presentations or just ways of thinking about presenting it? What's your thoughts?
It goes back to being very good and effective at discovery, because the only ROI, and I personally don't even recommend sellers use that, because ROI to an MBA or someone in finance has very specific definition, and it's not something you're ever going to really be able to do. They're not going to give you their cost of capital. They're not going to give you. So what I recommend sellers start with, because it sounds like it, but you'll lose credibility with some executives if you talk about an ROI, you can't show them an ROI. Talk about potential benefits or something similar to that. But the biggest thing is make sure you're only using their numbers. I cringe when I see companies that have developed an ROI spreadsheet, and the seller's going to put in some numbers they collect from the buyer, and oh my gosh, what a shock, it comes out the other end that you should buy this. It's a positive ROI. That doesn't have a lot of credibility. But if I'm working with you and I've developed a strong champion and I'm getting access to the other key players in this decision, and I'm having the kinds of discovery I'm talking about, I now have numbers, or at least round numbers, that are from you, from my buyer. And I'm only going to talk about the business case in terms of that. But that's the key. Those are numbers that should be interesting to them, that should get their attention, because I didn't make up or extrapolate anything from that. I'm taking their numbers and we're figuring out together that there's a gap there.
Well, I love that. I think what's coming through to me is sort of the idea of, through discovery, you uncover the numbers that ultimately become the outcome that you're going to reflect right back to them, which is sort of their own information,
Right.
that you've taken the time to really learn about and understand, and what
Yep.
they value. But then you have to put that into the context of each stakeholder involved in the
Right.
decision.
Right.
So,
There's a very critical meeting that I teach and recommend for enterprise sellers to use. And that is what I call an opportunity qualification meeting. So, especially with your emphasis on account management, I think you'll really like this. So, say that there are 5 decision makers. You're my champion. You're the one that brought me in. You saw the value. And by the way, when you do a better job of showing your first person the potential value in there, help them start to see that, the chance of them introducing you to other people goes way up, because you've just now approached it in a very different way. So you introduced me to these other 4 folks. I've now met with them. Each of them shared enough with me that I know at least one challenge, one future state that they're dealing with in their section of the business, and what the potential benefits are from that. Now, I'm going to ask you as my champion to come back and let's bring all of them together. You and I, we run this meeting together. Let's bring together the whole buying group, and I'm going to run. You'll kick it off, your meeting, but then I'm going to start with this. Hey, you brought me in. Thank you. It's been a few weeks, but when we first talked, these were the things you identified. These were the potential benefits. Has anything changed? No, Paul, it hasn't. Okay, great. Then I'm going to turn to Walter. Walter, same question, and then Sue, and then Anne, and then etc. Now think about what's happening there. First of all, it may have been some weeks since I talked to some of them, so I'm kind of refreshing it for them in real time. But the odds are also it's the first time that they're hearing about the potential outcomes that the other people in the buying group talked about with me. Now the thing is starting to really take on a life of its own. And that's why that is such a critical meeting, because that is the meeting where they're hearing from their peers, not from me as a salesperson, that there's potential value in pursuing this solution. They're hearing that this isn't just, they're not sticking their neck out and making this decision, because there are others in the group that also feel like this is worth pursuing. That's why that meeting's so critical, because if you run down the road without finding some way to pull everybody together and get that consensus, and the call to action from that meeting is, all right, thanks for confirming all of that for me based on what we've all talked about in our various meetings. It seems to me that it would, or actually what again, it would be, it seems to you and I, because we're running this meeting together, that let's put together a sequence of events that we can, all the things that we know on our side, we need to, look at for you to help you evaluate. There's things that I don't know, maybe even now you can tell me, but let's put that sequence together, and then let's figure out how we're going to go through and make this evaluation together and confirm these benefits, et cetera. That's what I want from those folks in that meeting. And if I come out of that meeting with a commitment to put one of those together that we'll operate off of together, number one, I'm now in a driver's seat that many salespeople never put themselves. Number two, you talked about how does my account team coordinate? What a powerful document that is. If I do my job as an account executive and I keep that sequence of events updated, anybody on my account team is going to know what's going on at any given time, what milestone is next, what do we have to do to clear that milestone. They know what their role is in it. It becomes a very powerful document.
That's excellent. Yeah, it's really a great form of leadership because what you're doing is helping to lead the client
Mm-hmm.
and the disparate stakeholders involved who don't have time to even sort of develop, a solution to an initiative that they really should be pursuing. You're sort of stepping into that role. They appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
You coordinate and synchronize sort of all of their desired end states and outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
You help lead them and then lead your own team with the same type of approach. And it's all
Mm-hmm.
sort of discovery, understand the problem thoroughly and take the outcomes and frame it right back to the very
Yeah.
executive buying
It, it,
team,
it all comes from them. It all comes from them. And that's why I say sometimes bad news early is good news.
Well, especially in enterprise accounts that have so many opportunities you can pursue. When
Right.
you turn some down and then you lean in on the ones that you
Exactly.
are the most qualified, you're just building your credibility.
Right.
I also wanted to just, talk about a little bit about infusing insights into these conversations. So we've talked about discovery and really understanding the
Mm-hmm.
problem and spending the time with the stakeholders and playing it back to them. But we've observed that when you infuse insights, new information, things that they're not aware of, because situations continuously evolve on the buyer side, on the client side, right? They're facing new developments happen in terms of a competitive offering that they need to react to, or
Sure.
legislative changes, or environmental conditions, or whatever it may be.
Dare we say tariffs?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you just who know nobody can plan for these things. You just don't know. Yeah.
So if you're just sort of insightful and
Mm-hmm.
provide insights on the spot, and those insights they're always well received as sort of our perspective if they're timely and relevant in the moment. And it's another way to ensure that you're sort of in a very good rhythm, let's say, with the executive buyer team as a trusted advisor and
Yeah.
participant in helping them solve problems.
Come in confident in what you know, confident in what you bring, confident in what your offerings have done for other clients, and just own that. Don't be a jerk. Don't be arrogant about it, but come in and just have that confidence. People respond to that and people respect that a lot more than they do when you're acting like they're doing you a massive favor. If you are doing a good job and you've honed your craft, you're actually bringing just as much value to the conversation, or should be, as they are in giving you your time. And I'm not saying don't thank them for their time, but that's it, right? Other than
Yeah.
that, just come in and just own the conversation and then listen.
Great words of wisdom. I think that's there's a domain of knowledge around solving problems that anybody is involved in when they're representing,
Mm-hmm.
a supplier, and it's really stop talking about features and start talking about problems, how other people solve
Yes.
those problems,
Yep.
sort of domain expertise and insights around those problem areas, and you know, it just pays dividends
Yep.
building trust. So in wrapping up, thinking about the customer enablement side of things, we've talked a lot about a wide range of different things that are important to buyers
Mm-hmm.
and outcomes and all the people involved and how to approach them. Any final comments or words of advice?
Something that was shared with me by a sales leader I've admired for decades now, and I'll just leave them with that. Sellers often think they have to be friends, or they overemphasize on the relationship with the buyer. But what this leader taught me, and I have found to be true over and over again, is people will buy from others that meet three things. Number one, they're authentic. People's guest meters are more finely tuned than ever before, right? Don't try it. Number two, are you competent? Are you a serious person that's worth talking to? And number three, can you empower them to do something that they cannot do already or can't do currently, but need to? If you meet those three criteria, then your odds of having a sale are pretty good. And if you become friends with them, great, but don't focus too much on that. Focus on the others.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Paul, for all your guidance and advice.
Yep.
We really appreciate it. It was great to have you on the podcast today.